Well, hello world. Those of you who've been following my channel carefully will know that I've got a Rega Saturn-R CD player. The reason being that my Apollo R started to suffer transport issues similar to the Apollo ones that I recorded a few years ago on here, whereby it was playing the first few seconds of a disc and then stopping. That was at best. Most of the time it was refusing to read a disc. Now it went back to Rega, who did a very quick repair on it, it has to be said. I took it into Audio T and they did a very quick repair on it, but I sold it on eBay. Um, the repair they did was free of charge, and it seems like they replaced the transport and a couple of chips in there, the U6 and 7 chips as it were. And at the time that I took it back, I had a discussion with the chap in Audio T and just decided to bite the bullet and max out my credit card and buy the Saturn R. Certainly is a slight space saver. And today I thought I would review it for you. Okay, so I'm going to start off though, just going through the annals of history and just going to talk a little bit about the evolution of Rega's CD players, just because I've seen a few forums where people have been inquiring about these things. Okay, Rega are very quiet about the specifications they use, by the way, so a tad vague about some of these and maybe what the improvements were, but as we progress, I think you'll see that there's a very sort of clear lineage of CD players. Now, Rega used to quote this adage, which was, "The early bird catches the worm, the last mouse gets the cheese," meaning that those people that adopt future technology straight away don't necessarily always sort of get the best of it. I suppose it's a bit like those people that adopt a new operating system straight away. There's usually bugs and kind of little sort of niggles and things that are wrong with it. Whereas if you wait a little while, those early bugs tend to get ironed out, and there seems to be a bit of an improvement. Now that was certainly true of CD. The early pundits touted it as perfect sound forever, and it certainly wasn't. And a lot of people were very disappointed with CD, even though records seemed to phase out, cassettes seemed to phase out, and you were just left with CD, which was the position that I was in the late 80s, early 90s, where cassettes were getting harder to get. I didn't have a record player at that time, so I was buying all my music on cassette, and CDs certainly offered better sound quality than cassette, although I was never really fully satisfied with the sound of CD, and to an extent I'm certainly not. Okay, my first hi-fi-ish CD player was a hi-fi separate one, which I plugged into my little Sharp radio cassette thing. It had aux-in sockets, and I plugged this realistic CD player, which was made by Tandy, which I think are the same as Maplin, I'm not sure. Yeah, it was, for me, coming through that little ghetto blaster thing, it was it was a revelation. I absolutely loved it. Putting it through any other kind of amplification, a few years later I got a Rotel amplifier, a very cheap one, RA931 or something like that, I think it was, or 921, something like that. It was about £130 in 1990 something, about 1995 or something, and it suddenly sounded like rusty nails and razor blades, really, really kind of cheap and nasty kind of sound. I managed to find an old Marantz CD 73 player, which was certainly better than the realistic one, which I played for a little while into the Rotel amplifier. But the Rotel amplifier had a nice habit of short circuiting, and I went through two of them, and one of them went up in smoke, and the other one just short circuited, and I ended up getting a Rega Luna amplifier to play the Marantz through. Now, I was so impressed with the Rega Luna amplifier that shortly after that I got, and we are still in the late 90s, we are now 1998, 1999, something like that, and I got a Rega Planet to go with the Luna. I did listen to quite a few other CD players at the time. This was Rayleigh Hi-Fi in Chelmsford that I was using at the time, because that's where I was living, or near there. And the Planet was by far the best out of all the players that I listened to. I tried one from Arkham, I tried a Rotel. It didn't catch fire while I was listening to it. I tried the Planet, and then there might have been another one there that I tried. I can't remember exactly what it was because it was a long time ago now. But Rega's first CD player, going back to this phrase, they are the last mouse that ate the cheese, because the first mouse got caught in the mouse trap. The second mouse got the cheese that was on it, and yeah, they didn't introduce a CD player until 1997. They were the last ever hi-fi manufacturer to introduce a CD player. They, even throughout CD's sort of heyday, when records were all but sort of disappearing from shops and only a very few had some, and then you had to sort of rely on second-hand dealers and stuff like that to buy records, they stuck doggedly to their records, and good on them for doing so, because vinyl for me is still the ultimate and the highest resolution in sound quality that you can get. But the Planet had a lovely sound. At the time, I wasn't using vinyl at all. It took me a few years to get a record player after that. But the Planet had this lovely rhythmic sound which I just wasn't used to getting from CD. It was lovely and civilized compared to the realistic and the Marantz CD player that I had. The Marantz was quite incisive and detailed. The Planet, I suppose, slightly less so, but it did for me what other CD players that I'd heard at the time, and I'd also sort of, my partner at the time had this horrible Sony sort of all-in-one system which had a multiplayer CD player on it, and you know, compared to that and compared to the realistic and the Marantz, the Planet really sort of made music. You know, it engaged you in a way that I'd not been engaged before. And yes, it was slightly warm and cuddly, and there was a slight lack of refinement there, but by and large, it was just such an engaging and all-enveloping listen, and I kept that Planet for many years until I read in a hi-fi magazine that Rega had introduced the Apollo, which was their other sort of basement spec or bass spec. I don't mean basement at all, but bass spec CD player. It was now I've written it all down here. So in 1997 they introduced the Planet. In 2000 they introduced the Planet 2000, which I think was just the Planet in a new CD case. The original Planet had like a sort of waffly kind of thing. It looked like a waffle maker. Had all these sort of bumps on the top of it. It had a different kind of transport system where the disc, as it were, that gripped the CD was on the outside of the top of the case, and it kind of was like a magnet that kind of landed on top of the CD. It was very much like putting a record on. It was. And I was just absolutely amazed. The thing that Rega said about the Planet, which carries through to their CD players today, is the lack of error correction that they used in there. Error correction meaning that if a CD player gets jogged, if someone comes in with heavy footsteps or something like that, you can't actually jolt the laser as it's playing, because the CD mechanism will correct it for you. But that puts a strain on everything inside, and also puts a strain on the sound that you're hearing as well. Rega did not like error correction, so they kept that down to a minimum, and they had instead these sort of rubberized feet on the bottom of the CD player, which gripped anything like I suppose, I don't know, a vice-like grip, as it were, on top of the surface. And that was true. It was absolutely, quite a bit of effort and force to try and move the CD player once it had been there for a little while, because these feet were stuck doggedly on there, and they advised not to put it on top of anything that would get sort of marked or anything like that, any kind of sort of precious wooden top or something like that. Put it on a sheet of glass, like on my hi-fi rack over there. Just about see it in the picture here. There's just sheets of glass on there. So yeah, the Planet 2000 sort of continued in the same vein, but they changed the casing. In 2004, they released the Apollo, and I got an Apollo in 2006. And the upgrade from the Planet sound to the Apollo sound was, yes, it was different. Something about this sort of warmth and coziness of the Planet had gone, but instead it was a far more detailed sound. There's slightly less kind of sort of performer emotion being conveyed, but it was quite an analytical CD player, and I kept that one for many years as well, until the transport started failing. And actually, I don't know whether this was good advice or bad advice or whatever, but because it was obviously out of guarantee and out of production by the time that it started to sort of die, I threw it away. I didn't even sell it, and perhaps I should have done. I should have sold it for spares to someone, just for £100 or something, and at least got something for it. But yeah, the Apollo had an improved disc reading mechanism, whereby it kept as it was reading the CD, it would read on 32 megabytes, I believe, ahead of the actual sound, so that it wasn't kind of doing two jobs at once, as it were. It wasn't reading the CD and trying to play that same bit of music at the same time. It was always reading ahead, a bit like you might read ahead if you're playing a piece of music. You're always looking a couple of bars ahead to see what's next, rather than just sort of, oh, this is an A major, this is a B major kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? So that was the rationale behind it. I loved the sound of it. But as I say, there was just something slightly missing from the original Planet sound. It was horses for courses, really. Absolutely gorgeous sound, and there's no doubt about it. It was a fantastic CD player. Slightly brighter in sound than the Planet, I believe. And that could certainly make certain remasters, particularly of things like Heinrich Jonsson ABBA Deluxe CDs that had just been remastered to stratospheric levels of compression and hard limiting and everything else that they did to it. It's just horrid. That kind of I didn't like that, but it was just an amazing sound. Okay, now in 2011, Rega released two products. First of all, they released the Apollo R, which was a half-size version of the Apollo with, I think it had an improved DAC in it, a 24-bit DAC, as opposed to the Apollo's I don't know what bit, and the Planets I don't know what bit DAC in there. The Apollo R I've talked about and reviewed on this system, on this channel, and it really, in comparison with the original Apollo, yes, it did all that the Apollo did, but it was a tiny bit more civilized, and the physical presence that you got with it was far improved over the Apollo. I'll talk about in a minute when I get on to reviewing the Saturn-R. I will get on to reviewing the Saturn-R, I promise. But I'll kind of sort of talk you through some of the sort of I suppose highs and lows of the Apollo R. It's an amazing CD player. It has to be said, on its own, being played through a reasonably good amplifier of roughly the same price, something like a Rega Brio, something like that. And a pair of speakers that, again, you know, a nice pair of budget floor standing speakers, Tannoy or Rega themselves, or well, not PMC because they're not budget, but yeah, I mean, even through the PMCs, the 2023s, which are like 4 or 5 times the price of the Apollo R, it just sounds amazing. It's just a delight to behold. Okay, it does have its flaws, but it's just amazing. Okay, and I'll talk you through what the flaws are in the base spec Apollo R a bit later on. Okay, because now we have to kind of move on to the evolution of Rega's top end CD players. Now, the top end CD player in 1998, which was shortly after the original Planet came out, was the Jupiter I/O. Okay, now the Jupiter was the transport mechanism. It cost about the same as the Planet itself. Okay, and while we're talking about costs, sorry, let's just go back a bit. While we're talking about costs, this is something that you know, particularly in Rega's sort of source component line, they're actually extremely good at, and that is for 1997, the Planet cost £450. Without the remote, 475 with the remote. Okay, the Apollo R is about £550. So it goes to show that from 1997 up to 2011, and how many years is that, maths students? 14 years. They've managed to keep a bargain basement CD player for roughly the same amount of money as you were paying then. Okay, so it's just it's just something that has to be noted, really, that although, you know, most people wouldn't pay 500 quid for a CD player because you can get one for 20 quid down Argos, the sonic benefits of actually going and, you know, sort of saving up and going that extra few miles really outweigh everything, really. And you know, it's just, they're just absolutely delightful CD players. Okay, so I never heard a Rega I/O though. Sorry, a Rega Jupiter. The Rega Jupiter was the transport. The I/O was the DAC that came with it. The transport was roughly the same price as the Planet. Okay, and the I/O was roughly the same price as the Planet. So it's about £800–900 to buy them both. And I suppose, you know, you would be recommended to buy them both. Although I suppose even in those days you could have bought an I/O and used a cheaper CD player, but I don't think you would have got quite the same sort of experience. Pretty near, because it is the DAC that does the work in terms of converting everything from digital to analog, and then sending that to an amplifier. It was Yeah, I don't know anything about the sound quality of it. Okay, in 2000, when the Planet 2000 got a makeover, the Jupiter 2000 got a makeover. It was slightly more radical in that the DAC and the transport were the same machine. Okay, so no two boxes. In the 90s, there was a fad and a fever for separating everything that could be separated, from amps and power amps and mono blocks and everything else like that, to CD players and transports. Okay, by 2000, I think there's a slightly sort of different kind of thinking there, that the less leads that you have to use to connect things together, the more integrated and the better the sound. Okay. As I say, I never heard a Jupiter 2000 either. Okay, in 2004, when the first Apollo was released, the Jupiter became the Saturn. Okay, and it used this same sort of new sort of 32 megabyte sort of cache memory system as the Apollo. But it had a better DAC section and a better power supply, and you know, it's to kind of give it its kind of you know, markup above the base spec Apollo. Again, I never heard one. I read a review in Hi-Fi World, and the reviewer stated at some point they were listening to a sort of a boys' choir singing some chorale or something like that. I don't know what the piece was, but they said that they could actually count the boys actually standing there in the group actually singing. You could count the number of voices that you heard. Now, I don't know whether or not you know, that's absolutely true or not. Although I'm enthralled by stereo separation and always have been, I do find that that I'm not able. You know, I don't have the, I suppose, the skills to be able to kind of pinpoint exactly what's playing and exactly where, you know, down to the nth degree. But if you could, then the Saturn would reveal it. Okay. Now, the waters get muddied slightly. In 2011, the Apollo R, as I say, was released. And also in 2011, the DAC was released. In 2014, the DAC-R was released. Okay, so again, I suppose it's going back to this Jupiter I/O philosophy again of, you know, although you can play the Apollo R on its own, you can upgrade it with the DAC-R. The DAC-R had, or has, because it's still current, it has a whole section there of sort of sockets on the back that will enable you to plug in any digital source, from a computer to a games console to a DVD player, whatever you want, and be able to use the digital to analog conversion of the Rega, rather than the cheap thing that's in whatever it is that you're putting through it. Okay, certainly the sound from my iMac dramatically improved, and I mean dramatically improved, by taking the optical out of the iMac into the DAC-R. I don't know what the sonic improvements were between the 2011 DAC and DAC-R, because I never heard a DAC. But yeah, so in 2009, going back just a smidge, just because we are, it's kind of slightly muddy here. The ISIS and ISIS Valve top-end reference CD players, which are still in production, you can still buy them. They were made, and the ISIS was or is about £6,000, and the ISIS Valve is about £7,500. I've heard the ISIS without the Valve section in it, and it certainly is absolutely an amazing CD player. But at the time, I had never heard the Saturn. Okay, as it was just the Saturn when the ISIS came came along. Okay, and there's some slightly muddy waters here. Again, I'm using the word muddy waters quite a lot because plugging an Apollo R into a DAC R should, in theory, give you a Saturn R. Okay, now the Saturn R was made and sort of brought into production after the ISIS. Okay, uses different technology from the ISIS, has a different. It has everything that the DAC R has all built in, whereas the ISIS only has USB. So you can use a USB socket to sort of plug in a computer or something like that to use the DAC in the ISIS, but it certainly doesn't have the DAC kind of, or DAC R kind of, you know, multi-socketed kind of thing with digital and optical inputs and outputs on it. So in theory, the ISIS should still sound better, but it's something new. I don't know. I don't know. Okay. So I suppose actually we ought to talk about kind of what the Saturn R sounds like. Okay, so over here, if you'll forgive the mess on my table over here, I have a pile of CDs. Okay, because I've had the Saturn R now for about a month now, I think. Now here comes a true tale of PSC stupidity. In many ways, I'm like Paddington. Okay. When I went to buy the Saturn R and take in my Apollo R for repair, I was chatting to the guy and he said, you know, do you want our demonstration one? Because otherwise I'd have to wait a fortnight to get a CD player and I'd be without one. And I'm not one that likes to be without CDs, even though I much prefer my vinyl. I just feel a little bit kind of glum in the boots and stuff, you know, and I was, you know, obviously finding an excuse to spend money, which I didn't really want to. But I said to him, you know, yeah, okay, I'll take the X demo one, the one that's on the rack. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, will you give me a little bit of money off there? And he said, oh, yes, we will, you know. And I talked to him about the couple 2 interconnect. Okay, Ashley knows this story because I was texting him like mad. What I did, stupid me, was after lugging this thing from Audio T to Brighton railway station, which is not a huge distance, but it's still, you know, if you're carrying something heavy, it's it's long enough. And yeah, you know, carrying the Apollo R on the way to the station, fine. Yeah. The guy put the box in my hand and it's massive and it is really heavy, and having to lug it all the way up to the station was just hell on earth. And I had to keep stopping and, you know, taking 5 minutes rest. You know, I'd take a few steps, stop, you know, God knows what the people on the street thought of me, but yeah. Yeah, and then going uphill with it, and it was just a nightmare. Okay, so this is kind of my excuse. By the time that I actually got the thing home, I was absolutely knackered. And once I got it out of Hastings Station, I live about half a minute from Hastings Station. I literally had to take a taxi. I was that. I should have got a taxi in the first place from Audio T up to the station. Stupid me. So I was absolutely knackered when I got home. Okay, that is my excuse. All right. So I plugged this thing in. I'd bought a couple in interconnects, and that was kind of discounted as well. It was like half price. So you know, thank you Audio T for discounting there. Now the couple 2 interconnect is a bit like the interconnect on the RP8 record player that I have. In other words, it has sort of tightening sort of covers over the wires. Okay, you loosen them, plug them in, tighten them up. Okay. I did this to my thing, took out my cord chrysalis thing, which I've been using for about 30 years, and or 20 years or something, and plugged this thing in, turned it on, and first of all, I got assaulted by this enormous volume of sound coming out. I was playing this. I got a few seconds of the introductory music here, and I thought, what's wrong? Oh dear, or words to that effect. I've plugged the couple 2 into the phono stage of my Alex R amplifier. Stupid man, because I use the Aria. I don't need to use the phono stage on the Alex R. Stupid man, absolutely stupid. Okay, then I tried to unscrew them and it wouldn't come off, and I didn't know which way I was supposed to be turning it. I didn't know lefty loosey righty tighty at the time, or at least it hadn't come into my head, and so I'm turning it which way, this way, that way, the next thing. It wouldn't come off. It wouldn't come off. I can still feel, even though it was weeks ago, I can still feel, thinking about it, you know, how sore my fingers were trying to get these bloody things to come off the off the socket. Eventually that evening, I managed to get the sockets away and unplug from the CD player end, so I could plug my cord back in and use a different input. But obviously you don't want to leave an unterminated end of plug with something plugged into a phono stage, because every time that you sort of cycle the inputs on the amplifier around to that phono stage, you're going to get a hum coming out of it, and you have to keep them well away from each other, otherwise you'll do some damage, or keep the pins well away from one another. Nasty, nasty, nasty. And it took about a week for me to gain the courage to try again and get these things unplugged. Eventually I managed to do it, but you know, literally for a week I just had, you know, a lead plugged into the phono stage and nothing else plugged into the other end. Stupid me, absolutely stupid me. Okay, nevertheless, okay, using the cord chrysalis with this album plugged into a proper line level socket, stupid man, just took my breath away. It just did. Okay, now I think I might have played this with the DAC R. I can't remember. Certainly, I played it on the Apollo R, and you'll get my comments on it. I've reviewed this album, but the sense of really being at that performance was just tangible, absolutely tangible. Okay, as well as it being lively, vibrant, physical, and just so knockout as and present as having this band playing in front of you. It was civilized as well. Okay, so civilized that I didn't realize at the time, but my normally I play CDs slightly quieter than I play albums, just because CD can be a little bit brittle and a bit uncivilized, but it certainly felt very much more comfortable being played at the volume that I'd previously left my record player at. Okay, and I hadn't realized at the time that that's where the volume was, because it was just so comfortable and easy to listen to, as well as being thumpingly good and thumpingly entertaining. Okay, so that was that one. Okay, and again, it's one of these things, actually, you know, I'll just listen to such and such a track. So you put it on, maybe the first couple of tracks. Listen to Gamel's Verbal Psalm and Voulez-Vous, maybe. Oh my God, if it wasn't for the Nights is coming on, I can't take it off. Oh my God, As Good as New's coming on, can't take it off. And that's how it was. That is how it was. It was just a dream, just untrue. And that feeling of I've put a CD on and I can't take it off is normally, I find myself sort of reserving that for vinyl. Okay, this is just untrue. Okay, it is all of and more of the of the rhythm and pace of the planet, which I loved so much, the civilized element of the Apollo R and the DAC R, and a good dose of welly as well. Okay, you really do get the impact without sort of it being out of control. You really get the impact of drums and bass as well. Okay, the Apollo R on its own without the DAC R can sound slightly uncouth in the bass end, and you know, certainly it sounds like it needs something, you know, sort of quite sort of industrialized to kind of control the bass sometimes. Okay, whereas here, yes, you've got, you know, oodles of bass, more bass in fact than the Apollo R, and yet it's not shaking things. It's not it's not making you feel like, oh my goodness, I'm standing out on the landing and I can feel this bass trap out there. It's just an absolute dream. Okay, what else have I played on it? Okay, I've got a lot of albums here, by the way, which I haven't listened to in ages, and I thought I would just choose some different ones really to spice up some of my sort of reviews, because otherwise you're just going to hear the same, me saying the same thing about the same albums. So although having said that, I've still got my Reference K CD here, which I adore. I love this album, and playing it on the Apollo R on its own without the DAC R. I don't think I played it with the DAC R, can't remember, but certainly playing it on the Apollo R. The Apollo R is very revealing. It will tell you a lot about the recording. Okay, now what you've essentially got on this album is sort of a traditional kind of I suppose rock band ensemble sort of thing with you know, synthesizers, guitars, electric guitars, drums, bass, and that sort of thing. Done, recorded pretty much in the 1990s style. Fair amount of compression on there, which kind of muddies the waters in terms of the sound. Okay, and you've also got some sort of very acoustic parts where they use sort of natural Indian instruments as well. Okay, those instruments are recorded perfectly. So when someone plays a tabla, you get the full bite of it. It's really entertaining. Okay, and some of these other instruments, I think there's something called a mandala on there, which is like a sort of stringed instrument, I suppose, a bit like a harp kind of thing. Certainly has that kind of sound on it, and it's recorded very well in its, you know, you're capturing the space that it's in. You're capturing the fingers plucking it as it's playing. You're getting all the kind of dynamic nuances, even micro dynamics, as notes sort of die away and wobble as well. And is, you know, or vibrate is the proper word rather than wobble. We're not talking wow and flutter here. We're talking, you know, we're talking sort of minute kind of sort of wobbles as the player is fingering the strings. Okay, and the Apollo R will reveal all that. You will know, and you'll be thinking, oh gosh, I wish that band wasn't quite so compressed. You know, oh, that's a lovely bit of tabla there. Oh, I can see his fingers moving on this mandala kind of instrument here. Fabulous. Still sounds brilliant. Okay, put it onto the Saturn R, and suddenly the whole thing starts to integrate. It's a much more wholesome and organic sound, whereby they all sound like they were recorded together in the same room, and it is, you know, a far more kind of integrated and wholesome performance. As well as that, you've got the traditional sort of Rega sort of pace, rhythm and timing, and a certain amount of heft as well, again without anything getting out of control, and again at volumes that are slightly louder than I'm normally used to listening to CD at. It's a very comfortable and easygoing CD player to listen to, but again, you know, as I say, this kind of this kind of heft to the sound. Okay. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. Okay. So when I was making, thinking about what I was going to do for this review video, I started thinking about it last night. I thought, ooh, fancy a bit of Britpop. So saw this on my CD shelf over there, and yeah, I haven't listened to this album probably since many years, as ABBA would say, since many years. But yeah, so I thought I'd put this on. It's a thumpingly good album. Okay. Now it wasn't. I think it was possibly sort of, because it was like 1997 or something like that, 1996. I would think that the technology that they were using to record it with was 16-bit 44. Not sure, but I would imagine that that's it. Sounds like a sort of pretty cheap recording. It's not the most hi-fi recording in the world, put it that way. Okay. Via the Saturn-R, and I have to say, because I've not played it, I think probably the last time I played it was on my Marantz or something like that. So it's been a very long time since I've heard it. But I've never, obviously you hear the songs on the radio and whatnot, and parties and stuff like that. I have never heard it sound as entertaining as it does. Yes, the recording is flawed. Okay, the bass is very thumpy and boomy. Okay, but that will be whatever you play it on. Okay, it will either sound like it's hardly there, because in a very cheap CD player, I'm talking the CD ghetto blastery type thing, it just won't have the guts to be able to produce or reproduce the bass that's on here. Again, not so out of balance. I think possibly playing it on the Apollo R, or maybe even the Apollo, might sort of reveal slight unevenness, okay, in the bass. But here, on it's an even sound, but it can be a bit bum 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 bum. What am I thinking of? Common People, for instance, has a really heavy bass line that is slightly overdone on the CD. Okay. There are sort of moments here of absolute joy to behold, though. Okay, what am I looking at here? I love Something's Changed. I love it. I just love the song, and it's just beautiful, and the strings soar, and they don't grate your ears, and the vocals are absolutely beautiful. Okay. Sorted Out for Ease and Whiz. Love it, absolutely love it. Okay. Again, the kind of effects that they use on that song, it's a bit like the Kula Shaker. There kind of two elements to it. There's the actual band playing the song, but at points in the song, it kind of it reverts to this kind of sound whereby maybe you've got the DJ in the field with 2,000 people, and it's sounding like you're at a festival. Okay. And it's so lifelike, and as the song switches gears, for that kind of mid-late bit, you are transfixed. You are absolutely transfixed. And the quiet parts of that song, ooh, when you come down, the bass drums in there, absolutely boom, boom, and they start and stop on a pinhead. Okay, a bit like somebody doing an emergency stop in a car, but without the jolt and without the sort of throwing you through the windscreen. It's just boom, there, and comfortable, but on a pinhead. Okay, there's some breathy whispers during that section as well, behind the main vocal, which are absolutely tantalizing to listen to. It's just absolutely fantastic, but the recording itself is slightly unrefined. Okay, but brilliant to listen to on the Saturn-R. Okay, So then I thought, and this is last night, I thought I ought to listen to something familiar. Now, quite why on earth anyone would listen to the Beatles on CD, I don't know. But here we are listening to the Beatles on CD. And this is Past Masters, okay? I listened to disc 1, okay, because most of the songs that I don't have on vinyl tend to be on disc 1. It's like going back to the cavern. It's just amazing, just absolutely amazing. What you appreciate, certainly, you know, listening to the Beatles on quality equipment. Okay, and when I say quality equipment, you know, as I say, the ultimate that you can listen to the Beatles on is vinyl. Okay, really is. Okay, the music was not ever intended to be digitally whatevered. Okay, it just didn't exist in those times. Okay, and I think you could possibly say that for any music that was originally intended for vinyl. Let it stay on vinyl, because you know that's what it was meant for. That's, you know, the whole process, the whole planning process of recording it, you know, it back in the 60s or the 70s or whatever, you know, it just does not transfer to CD. However, you know, the people who remastered this in 2009 did a very, very good job of it. It has to be said. And again, I've spoken about this in the past. Okay, and I'd never felt quite as being transferred to the cavern as I did last night. Okay, yes, it was good being played on the Apollo when I reviewed this originally. It was very good being played on the Apollo R. But it's astounding being played on the Saturn-R, particularly when you get past sort of about 1964, and you know, the 1964 and 65 recordings on here are just amazing. You know, I Feel Fine, that lovely sort of feedbacky bit at the beginning, it's just astounding to listen to. And they knew how to record things. They were brilliant recordings in the first place. You know, and obviously vinyl is better, but you know, absolutely astounding, and via the Saturn-R, just absolutely brilliant. Okay, still in the Britpoppy kind of thing. I don't know if I'm offending anyone by using the word Britpop. It's music. Okay, this album, Mosely, Shoals by Ocean Colour Scene, another one that I haven't listened to for absolutely yonks. Okay, I never really got into Oasis. I've got it's not definitely maybe. What's the one I've got? What's the Story, Morning Glory? I've got that somewhere. I think it's got a jump on it. So again, it's something that hasn't been played for, you know, 15 years or something. This album I did play an awful lot in the late 90s. In fact, I remember auditioning, in quotes, I think I took this along and auditioned The Planet with it. I took a Shack album along, and I think I took this album along as well. This is like having, again, it's like being in a pub with you know, a good band playing. Okay, or you know, I suppose, you know, having Abbey Road playing, but a sort of 90s version of it. It's just, yeah, absolutely stunning. A far better recording, it has to be said, than the Pulp one, and you know, far more dynamic as well. The Saturn-R is really telling you when things are loud and when things are quiet. Okay, you don't get that with modern masterings, by the way. You know, the late 90s is infamous for loudness war mastering, but this one isn't. Okay, it has bite to it, and power. Never let it be said that the Saturn is so civilized that it doesn't sort of give you a full dollop of power and bite behind the instruments. It's civilized. It won't take your ears off. It's thoroughly entertaining to listen to. It just will not take your ears off. Okay, it's not. It's possibly not for those that are so faint-hearted with their music that they will only listen to audiophile recordings on the linen name labels. You could hear Diana Krall. I listened to Diana Krall on it, and then I put a little bit of Enya on it. No. It will reveal and give plenty of thump and wallop to albums, but it's dynamic and it's brilliant. And this album, again, this is another one I thought, I know, I'll just listen to the Riverboat song and The Day We Caught the Train. But it has to be said that this is recorded a bit like Sgt. Pepper, where there's no there are no gaps in between the songs, and the Riverboat song kind of fades out and on the right hand side, and then suddenly the first vocals of The Day We Caught the Train come in, and it's just rhythmic, pacey, lively, and dynamic, and just enthralling to listen to, and noting for those people that are interested in CD mastering and stuff like that, those moments where you get climaxes of sound and then suddenly it drops, okay, such as in The Circle, for instance, which is track 3 on here, because I couldn't take the CD off. I had to listen to it all. But those moments where the middle 8 comes up to here, the chord doesn't resolve, and suddenly we're back into the verse, and the volume drops again, are absolutely magical. You don't get that with songs these days, because they're just so intent on making them bloody loud so that they sound all right on my mobile phone. But fantastic album. It will sound brilliant on whether you've got an Apollo or an Apollo R, or an Apollo R and a DAC R, but it would just take your breath away on the Saturn-R. It's just a fabulous thing. Again, you can pick out the instruments. You really can pick out the instruments, even though, as I said earlier, I'm not particularly good at it. The Saturn-R just makes it blindingly obvious. So we've had that one. Okay, a couple of things I just thought I'd sort of throw into the mix, as it were, before I sort of ended my serious review listening section or session. I've just played some of this album. Okay, there was because CD has longer playing times than vinyl. Okay, that was one of the things that they tried to sell CD with, that you could get about sort of 70 odd minutes onto a single CD, as opposed to maybe 40 minutes or 45 minutes on an album of compressed tracks. And by the late 90s, early noughties, people really went to town on that, and they made their albums far too long. I can remember sort of sitting through, what seemed like sort of terminal Ryan Adams. Now, I love Ryan Adams in small doses. I love any album in small doses. And for me, always less is more. Okay, one of the things that is just amazing about a David Sylvian album, the David Sylvian album, what is it called? Secrets of the Beehive, is the fact that it's so short, and you're just left going, and the kind of transportation back down to planet Earth is quite sudden, and it leaves you just wanting to play it again. Whereas albums like this one, they're a great experience to listen to, and pretty amazing and brilliant album, and nothing about the music, but you kind of think, I don't think I've got time to listen to that again today. Same with this. Too much, but again, gorgeous music. Okay, the piano on Flint is just breathtaking to behold. It's an electric piano, I do believe, and this is another album that is, you know, it's not the ultimate hi-fi. Looking at the CD insert, shows that it was recorded in lots of people's houses, and so, you know, it's not sort of the most hi-fi recording, but it's beautiful music, absolutely beautiful music. The piano on Flint, the way that the brass comes in, I've heard that brass take your ears off. It doesn't on the Saturn, or Saturn-R as it is. And the vocals are great. And, you know, what I was thinking about, you know, apart from, you know, sort of trying to listen to the music here, because you do listen to the music, you know, you don't think, oh, I wonder about the degree of stereo separation going on there. You're just enthralled by the music, and it's just the thing that got me was the fact that in, I suppose, cheaper hi-fi components, they'll be very good at a particular area of sonic reproduction. They might shine a spotlight on the vocals, or there might be sort of pacey and rhythmic, and, you know, have, you know, a good solid bass, but there's somewhere in the treble that's not fantastic. This will shine a spotlight onto all the instruments that are playing. Okay, it's just a thoroughly all-round good, fantastic in all areas Saturn-R CD player. Just really, really good. Okay, I also listened on here too. I have to read it because it's a really bizarre title. Track 3 on here. I didn't listen to all of it. For the Widow in Paradise, for the Fatherless in Ypsilanti. And, you know, the banjo playing at the beginning is just stunning. When the vocals come in, the male vocals, it's stunning. Okay, you can hear the guy's accent, you can hear his breath, and then when the female vocals come in, the song changes gear. When the brass comes in, because Sufjan Stevens, this is Greetings from Michigan, the Great Lakes State, by Sufjan Stevens. I don't think I told you earlier on, but really, it's quite a sad album, really. Okay, while we're on sad and while we're on Michigan, okay, they've got a terrible crisis going on at the moment. This is completely off topic, but I'm going to say it anyway. Okay, this is the state of Michigan. Okay, I'm not really sure whether there really is a place called hell in Michigan. Okay, but here is the city of Flint. Okay, the Flint River is completely polluted. Okay, and a couple of years ago, the state employed unelected managers, emergency managers they were called, to try and save money in providing public services, and they sold an awful lot of them off, including the water supply. Okay, when they sold off the water supply, they changed the water supply from the Detroit water supply down here to the Flint River water supply. General Motors complained and said, the water that we're having to use here to wash our engine parts in is corroding them and rusting them. Can we please switch back to the Detroit supply? They said yes. It took a lot longer for them to realise that, or for them to think, well, actually, if it's corroding engine parts, what the hell is it doing to people? And so, you know, you had an awful lot of children and stuff getting lead poisoning. They put chlorine in, which reacted very badly with some of the pollutants that were in the water, and that's sort of caused a lot of illness as well, and made it worse. I think they've switched it back now to the Detroit power supply, to Detroit water supply, but there's still an awful lot of people that have got corroded pipes in their houses and stuff like that, and you still cannot drink the water, and people are having to wash, bath, and drink bottled water now. Now, isn't that wonderful? Because around here, there is a firm called Nestlé. You will know them for Kit Kat bars. You will know them for Nescafe coffee. You'll also know them because they produce drinking water. Okay, throughout all that time, and sort of since about 2002, I believe, they paid a pittance for a permit and a little bit of private land rental to build a plant by Lake Michigan here, just a couple of hours drive away from Flint. Okay, and they don't pay for any water, but they have a bottling plant there, and they bottle that water. They're making an absolute fortune selling it back to the residents of Flint. Okay, they're making an absolute fortune selling it to the likes of you and me. That water goes all over the world. If you please do not buy Nestlé products, buy Rega ones instead. Okay, sorry about that little political rant in there, but it has to be said, you know, having put this album on. Last album, well, I didn't really listen to the whole album. I listened to the first couple of tracks on this one, 7, Lisa Stansfield. Okay, it was the first one that I put on when I played the Apollo R for the first time and was astounded by it. Ooh, that's a nice solid rhythmic background at the beginning there. Isn't it great? Oh, it's a bit danceable. Oh, I like it. Oh, I like it. Put it on the Saturn-R. Not only is it solid and danceable, the sticks hit the drums. You get transients. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. When she sings, it's breathtaking. When the guitars play their sort of rhythm guitar licks in there, you can not only can you follow it completely, but you could also follow their finger movements on the guitars as they are playing. Okay, you feel the strings bending. It's amazing, absolutely fantastic. So for those of you who are wondering and thinking, well, it's just numbers, isn't it? Numbers on a CD being read by something that reads numbers will sound the same regardless of whatever. No, it's not true. You do get a huge sonic benefit by upgrading from, you know, bargain basement or lower spec CD players, or even very, very cheap ones, obviously very, very cheap ones, to something like the Saturn-R. Is amazing. Okay, and finally, because the Saturn-R is not just a CD player. Now the ISIS and the ISIS valve, yes, they do have, you can access the DAC on it, but it's not actually as comprehensive a section of sockets and inputs and outputs as are on the Saturn-R. The Saturn-R has all the DAC-Rs for digital inputs, the USB input and the digital outputs as well, all sort of built into it. Okay, this is the remote control that comes with it, and what you do, this button here is called CD and DAC. Okay, you press that and it changes it from the CD player mode for playing CDs to the DAC mode. The only worry, okay, that I had when I first powered this up and thought, you know, I'll swap it to listen to something on the iMac or watch something, watch telly or something, was that when I turned it on, it says, like as it says now, 44/48 kilohertz, no input. And I thought, I've got it plugged in. What's the problem? What's the problem? But it does change when it's actually working. Okay, I was a bit disconcerted, thinking, oh my goodness, there must be something wrong. I must have not connected it properly or something like that. What have I done now? Considering that I managed to connect the thing to the phono inputs in the first place on my amplifier, you know, I thought, you know, I must have done something wrong here. And in fact, I hadn't. When I actually started playing something on the iMac, the display told me that I was playing something. Okay, so that's the only very, very slight downside. Okay, that Saturn-R is just a revelation to behold. I doubt whether or not the ISIS could significantly better it. Okay, given that the ISIS is actually 5 years behind in development from the Saturn-R. And when you go onto Rega's website and you look at the complementary components, the ISIS is recommended to be played with the Osiris amplifier, as it obviously would be. 2 reference products, 12 grand, lovely. I wonder how much, and I wonder how much difference there would be with the Saturn-R and the ISIS coming through my much cheaper Elex-R amplifier. There might be, there might be an improvement. I obviously have not got 6 grand to go and buy an ISIS, okay? And the complementary components that Rega recommend for the Saturn-R is the Illicit-R amplifier, which is the amplifier above the amplifier that I'm using. The Apollo-R, they recommend the Brio, which is the one below the Elex-R, which is the one that I'm using. But I wonder, again, how much difference there would be between the ISIS and the Saturn-R being played through the Osiris top-end reference 6 grand amplifier. And again, I doubt whether or not the difference would be night and day. And I think possibly Rega know that, because I think you could certainly make a case for having a system based around a Saturn-R and an Osiris amplifier. Okay, I don't doubt that the Osiris amplifier is way better than the Illicit-R. In fact, I would be very surprised if that was not the case. Okay, having heard the Illicit-R against the Elex-R, and having heard the ISIS, okay, all fantastic amps, but for me the Illicit-R was a slight disappointment. The Elex-R was a revelation compared to the Mira 3, which was a fantastic amplifier, just different in sound quality, just different characteristics. The Elex-R was, wow, okay. The Osiris was wow, okay, but the Illicit-R for me was just a slight sort of disappointment. I was thinking, oh, it's not managing to control the bass. That was with the Apollo R, without a DAC or anything like that. It just didn't sound like it was having such a nice time. Okay, whereas with the Elex-R, it sounded fabulous and having a lovely time. Okay, and I think there's just a little bit of sort of confusion there as to which components would be best for which. Okay, certainly someone with an Elex-R or an Illicit-R will have a fantastic time with the Saturn-R player, but I believe that there is a case that you could certainly partner it with the top end Osiris and still have a fantastic time. Okay, the DAC-R kind of section of this sounds fantastic. It always did. Okay, playing the iMac through there, I don't know if it's better. It's not night and day better. I think the DAC-R itself has an improved, has a slightly less substantial power supply than the Saturn-R, and there might be a slight difference there, but it's not the transformation from using the analog socket into an analog socket here and using the iMac DAC, which is rubbish. It has to be said, it's rubbish. Okay, so yeah, I am going to finish there. Okay, the Saturn-R is an amazing product, whether you use it as a DAC, whether you're playing CDs on it. Certainly it plays CDs far better than I've heard anything else play them. Okay, with the possible exception of the ISIS CD player, but again I think that the difference is like that. Okay, It's like that. Okay, there's a definite improvement over the Apollo R and the DAC R. Fantastic though that is, there's still a definite improvement, a definite kind of cohesion and an oomph and physical grabbability about the sound, and you know, it's a more civilized sound still. Okay, I'm going to leave it there because I've probably gone on forever. Oh God, I've gone on for an hour and 10 minutes. Okay, so there I will stop.